Blessings, good evening. People often ask why we begin our evening puja or chanting with lighting candles and incense. Since the time of the Buddha, it's been something that disciples, students of the Buddha do. It's a way of showing reverence, respect for teacher. The candles and incense also have a certain symbolic meaning. Some people think 3 sticks of incense must mean Buddha, Dhamma, Sangha, and that's okay if that's how you view it. Traditionally, 3 sticks of incense actually refers to the qualities of the Buddha. We call the Mahaparisuddhikula, the great purity of the Buddha. Buddha's mind is free from mental defilement, rooted in greed, anger, delusion, and therefore completely free from suffering. Second quality is Mahakarunadikuna, great compassion of the Buddha. The third quality is Mahapanyatikuna, the great wisdom of the Buddha. Because not only did he purify his own mind from delusion and suffering without a teacher, he was self-enlightened. He also had the ability to show and teach others the same. And these 3 qualities kept the Buddha inspired and energized through his practice until he was a Buddha, and then after he was a Buddha, brought him to teach. Spend after his enlightenment, another 45 years wandering around India teaching. So every time we light 3 sticks of incense, then it's a time to reflect or recollect those qualities. Many aspects of monastic life and even simple rituals in lay life can be like that. They just bring us back to the Buddha, recollecting the Buddha, the Dhamma, the Sangha, and then the purpose of the practice, freedom or liberation from suffering. Another way we describe the Buddha, we say Puru, Puden, Pudbogpan. One who knows, one who is awake, and one who is joyful. The 3 qualities of the enlightened mind, and that really applies to anyone who follows the Noble Eightfold Path and frees their mind from delusion. Freeing your mind from delusion brings you joy, and you awaken to the truth, so you're no longer deluded. And you have knowledge, a special kind of knowledge. You might say almost a unique kind of knowledge, the knowledge of or insight into the 4 Noble Truths, but knowledge that takes away all forms of stress and suffering from the human mind. So it's the best kind of knowledge. And it has to be developed through observing oneself, getting to know the truth about oneself as a human being, to know this body, this mind, and how it works. most branches of knowledge are associated with other people and other things around us in the world. But the knowledge that the Buddha gained and realized, that freedom from suffering, came about by turning his attention inwards to his own mind. And as we often say, on the night of his enlightenment, or the day and night of his enlightenment, it began with him recollecting the time when he was a boy and his father, the king or the leader of the country, was performing the royal ploughing ceremony, probably with great fanfare and lots of people around, and various rituals were being performed. But the Buddha, perhaps tired of it, even though he was a child, but just tired of the sort of rituals and pomp and whatever kings and their followers will do and engage in. He's perhaps tired of that, so he went and sat under the tree, the rose apple tree, and just, without much prompting, started to meditate and seemed to be good at it, even from a young age. And so he made his mind peaceful, following the breath, and went into first jhana, they say. But under the Bodhi tree on the night of his enlightenment, that's what he recollected when he began meditating. So you could say that's the beginning of the Buddha's enlightenment, recollecting being a child, entering into a deep state of peaceful samadhi, concentration. And some intuitive knowledge, something inside him said that's a good starting point. And so he repeated that, practicing mindfulness of breathing. He made his mind calm, mindful, awake, we say. But then he went on not only to deepen the samadhi, but also to contemplate. And that previously had been missing from his own practice and from all the other practitioners, meditators in the world. They hadn't fully penetrated the Four Noble Truths and hadn't fully contemplated suffering and its origins and the cessation of the suffering. They hadn't become fully aware of the three universal characteristics of existence, which help us to bring an end to suffering, to end greed, anger and delusion. Hadn't practiced vipassana and developed insight into the impermanence, unsatisfactory nature of phenomena, or the lack of self in phenomena, anatta. That was particularly what was lacking from all the other teachings and teaching systems in the world. Most people interpreted experience from the point of view of God, or a God, and the God that people believed in and followed generally was sort of a personification, an idea of a superior being, but still a being. Everyone has their own idea of a God. When I grew up, we had a picture of God on the wall. Or it actually wasn't God, but it's when I was a kid, me and my brother and sister thought this picture was God. Old man with a long beard, white beard, long white hair. Everyone has their own vision of God. But the Buddha pointed out that suffering and the cycle of birth and death comes from avijja. It's not an act of God or under the control of the God or anyone. It's due to the ignorance that affects the mind of each individual. Through ignorance we make karma, good and bad karma, and we set off a whole process of causes and conditions, a whole chain reaction over and over again through our lives that leads to making more karma and ultimately leads to more suffering because of craving and attachment. There's suffering. And that's just a natural law of the way things are. In Buddhism we call it dependent origination or ita paccayada, law of causality, the interdependent nature of causes and conditions. So suffering has its causes. When the causes are removed, suffering is removed. But that's not an act of a superior being. It's by seeing that ultimately there is no being, there's no self. That was the Buddha's insight into not self or non-self. When we practice to develop that insight, often we think we have this sort of feeling it's some very deep, profound insight, and of course, in the final aspect, it is very deep, profound, liberating, leads to nibbana. But actually the insight into not-self pervades, is apparent in all the Buddhist practice, all the Buddhist teachings from the beginning. Whether it's the practice of dana, sila, samatha meditation, vipassana meditation, any aspect, good qualities that we're developing, they all fall within this teaching, within the teaching of dependent origination and how things arise through causes and conditions, pass away and cease when those causes and conditions disappear. So even the Buddhist practice that we're cultivating, say like the Noble Eightfold Path, still comes under that teaching until one has completely penetrated the Four Noble Truths. We're still maybe having the assumption or the delusion of a self up until a point, but the self that we attach to is an ever, you might say, ever more refined, subtle sense of self. We let go of the coarse sense of self first through the practice of dana, sila, and then through bhavana, meditation, questioning, investigating the more subtle sense of self, until even that is dissolved away through the power of insight. But to train in insight into not self, anatta, say with practice of dana, one way of looking at it I found helpful. Ajahn Buddhadasa used to say, do good with your right hand, but you don't have to let your left hand know. And why would he say that? What it means is, you do good, meaning all aspects of the practice, the Dhamma practice, the Noble Eightfold Path are considered doing good. But not letting the left hand know, you don't have to tell everyone about it. Because that tends to boost the sense of self and takes you away from the very thing that you're investigating and learning to let go of. So like with regards to practice of generosity and kindness in daily life, dana, metta, we practice it, but we just do it. And that in itself is one of the causes and conditions for letting go of self, sense of self, attachment to self. You practice dana, whether it's giving time, energy, or knowledge, sharing those things, or sharing a material thing. You're giving away something that formerly you invested a sense of self in. If you give someone a gift or a donation of something, money or food or whatever, that's something that formerly belonged to you, and so you had that sense of ownership or self, and then you give it away. Knowledge too. You give away knowledge, you share it. Time, which we often are very possessive of, my time. So it's my time, your time. So we give some time to maybe our job or to the community around us, but then we want my time. So that sense of self can even form around very subtle things, but we practice service and kindness, doing things for others for the general benefit. It's a form of dana, and it's also can be something you practice for letting go of self. And you don't have to tell everyone what you're doing. Whatever kind of charity, generosity you practice with the right hand, the left hand doesn't need to know. We don't need to get tricked or sucked into the sort of habit of telling everyone on social media or just telling everyone verbally, whatever. We just do it, and don't need to make anything more out of it. It's just doing it in a good way and letting go of self at the same time. Precepts are the same. You keep precepts not to impress people or to tell everyone how pure you are. It's to help you remove various unwholesome intentions from your consciousness. The intention, as we just chanted, the intention to kill. You're giving up that intention on every level, whether it's people or animals or insects, down to the smallest insect, breathing creature. That intention, however fleeting, however weak, seeing the harm of that, and it arises out of the sense of self, doesn't it? There's no need to kill anything if you don't have a sense of self, because there's nothing to defend or protect or get angry about. So you keep the precepts. You don't need to tell everyone about it or do it for anyone. It's simply as a practice, because it's a good thing for the benefit of oneself, for others. It purifies the mind of skillful states. So the right hand can do it, and the left hand doesn't need to know about it even. Meditation the same. We practice meditation not to impress anyone or get something from anyone or make ourselves get a reputation or to do it to sort of compete with anyone. Those thoughts may come up, but ultimately you're letting go of self. So you're cultivating the qualities of a peaceful mind, samadhi, and then investigating the truth, the Four Noble Truths, and investigating the three characteristics to remove this ever more subtle sense of self that you might keep discovering. So the Buddha under the Bodhi tree had that discovery that even if you can attain jhana, enter deep states of samadhi, experience that joy, that happiness, when the mind withdraws, there's still attachment to a sense of self. There's still a sense of me, my body, who I am, what we identify with as our personality and our background and our family, particularly family. He said, you could see there's still attachment to parents, wife, child. Sense of self brings that up. So he had to investigate it, contemplate impermanence. So all through his teachings, it's always coming back to the fact that this life is impermanent, this body is impermanent, the things we say we own and have are impermanent, and we ultimately must separate from everybody and everything that we love and like. That's the nature of the world. Because the Buddha was well trained in mindfulness and samadhi, he could now turn his mind to contemplate and his mindfulness was so good that he could focus on that practice of contemplating impermanence, unsatisfactoriness, not self, in everything that his mind was involved with, and see it very clearly. Remove the craving, the attachment that causes suffering. So at every level of the practice, we're investigating the causes of suffering. So when we say, oh, suffering is caused by tanha, craving, wanting, desire, that sense of self, isn't it? That self manifesting in that moment when you want something or you want to get rid of something that you don't like, or you want something you do like. That's the sense of self. And that's not a superior being kind of manipulating you or making that happen. That's, from the Buddha's understanding, it's just how nature works. When you see something desirable to you, attractive to you, because this also depends on your particular perceptions and your past, your character. If you're not fully mindful, clearly comprehending, wisdom, understanding of the Four Noble Truths is not present, it gives rise to liking, attraction, wanting. That's just the way it is. If you look at something desirable and it stimulates some form of pleasure, pleasurable feeling, well, you want that feeling, you like it, you react in a certain way to it. Partly out of habit, partly out of the desirable nature of that feeling accompanying that sense contact of seeing or hearing, tasting, touching, smelling, or even just remembering. But there's no one there in that. But at first, that's very hard to see, so we still have this sense of a me. I'm meditating and I'm struggling with my craving that keeps coming up, and I'm not sharp enough, quick enough to cut it off, so I'm meditating, observing all this craving coming up, taking over my mind, leading to what we call mental proliferation. So we have all kinds of dreams and desires about things we like, and sometimes think about stuff we don't like, and we react with liking and disliking, attraction and aversion to sense contact from moment to moment. And it's just going on all through our life, whether we realize it or not. But as soon as we start practicing mindfulness and investigating, well, there we start noticing. And if your mindfulness improves, you're kind of waking up to the truth more and more, you notice it more. And you see, this process, this habit of following craving and then suffering because of it. And maybe this is something I can change. I can catch it. You can't stop this body and the senses we have experiencing pleasure, but you can manage it and control it in the sense that you can choose. You can practice sense restraint, and if you're stuck in looking at something that you like, you can choose to look away or close your eyes. You have some agency there, and that's like bringing the Noble Eightfold Path in. When you notice craving is being stimulated, wanting something, or when you're caught into aversion, wanting to get rid of something, you can bring in the Noble Eightfold Path, all of it, Sila, Samadhi, Panya, the whole lot, and observe what's going on. And say, oh, there is craving arising, there's some pleasure or there's some pain reacting to it. And you bring in the restraint, the precepts. Maybe in the first case is just using precepts to restrain the strongest kinds of craving and attachment that would lead you to do something that hurts someone else, or sometimes hurts ourselves, or hurts both. You don't, because you don't kill, you don't steal, don't commit acts of sexual misconduct, you don't lie or use false speech, you don't drink or take drugs. You keep that intention in mind, even though there's various things stimulating you and you're tempted to react in a certain way. But you don't. And the more you do that, you're changing, already affecting this process by which craving leads to attachment, leads to suffering. You have to practice precepts, you have to be restrained, whether it's 5 precepts, 8, or the Bhikkhu Patimokkha. You need to be restrained, mindful, and determined to abandon certain unwholesome intentions from your mind when they arise and not to act on them. The more you do it, generally the easier it gets. But if we're not careful, sometimes we get good at, we get sneaky, and the mental defilements, the craving, the attachment kind of finds ways to sneak into our behavior, develops resistance, and sometimes we comes through our view, our opinion on something, so we sort of say, oh, it's all right this time, I'll just break the precept or follow this bit of anger or greed. Or maybe it's someone else is doing it, so they're doing it, I'll do it. Or sometimes we say, I'm tired, I can't practice. Or, there's always some kind of excuse and something going on. So we have to be vigilant. So we have these qualities the Buddha said: be diligent, be vigilant, be careful, be mindful, be reflective. You have to review and reflect on your behavior over and over again. If you do that, maybe you get stronger and more determined and clearer in your mind. You'll see intentions arise before you've acted. The intention to take something that is not yours, to kill, to tell a lie, say. When you begin practicing, you're not good at that. You sort of only catch it afterwards and then feel regret or sad. But it doesn't take long maybe before you're catching the intention, before you've actually said or done anything. And then you have more control. And then you don't have the suffering of regret and sadness. That is letting go of self, or practicing not self. Because a part of your conditioning that formerly you may associated with as a self, this is me, I do this behavior, you give that up. And as you let go of self, there's always a certain benefit. The mind becomes more clear, more peaceful, more radiant, happy. Wisdom grows. You're replacing desire with wisdom. Replacing craving with Dhamma, using Dhamma as a phrase just for descriptive term for all the good qualities that you develop through the practice. As Dhamma comes up, then craving and attachment fades out more and more, and the Dhamma starts to be present and guide your behavior. Of course, as you deepen your practice of mindfulness and meditation, and then investigating the truth or investigating Dhamma, even more so, you can catch craving much quicker and see it, recognize it as the cause of suffering. Even when it's very strong coming up, the suffering of following craving will be worse than the suffering of resisting it, which is also suffering, certainly at first, isn't it? It's hard to not give in to certain unwholesome desires because they're very strong. They're kind of pulling away, pulling the mind in a certain direction. And it requires a lot of effort to restrain strong anger, strong lust, strong greed, strong fear, strong worry, anxiety, requires a lot of mindfulness, restraint and effort not to follow strong emotions, negative emotions. But sooner or later you realize that it's better to go through that temporary, brief kind of suffering, the suffering of the struggle, than to just give in to the particular kind of craving or attachment, which only reinforces itself, gets stronger, and will come up again and again and again, and cause more suffering in the future, worse suffering. At some point the mind gets that. You might call this a form of wisdom, panya. You understand the Four Noble Truths. If I follow craving, there will be suffering. Therefore don't follow it. Just let it subside by itself. Don't give in to it, don't follow it. On every level, the level of precepts, even the level of dana, just sort of being selfish or stingy in your life, you're becoming a little bit more open and helpful, kind. On the level of precepts, being more restrained, more kind. On the level of Dhamma, being more mindful rather than less mindful, and using insight and wisdom rather than just following delusion and wrong views. It gets easier, and the mind maybe inclines more to the Dhamma than to the opposite of Dhamma, what they call adhamma, without Dhamma. Avijja, delusion, ignorance, and craving and attachment. So as we practice the Dhamma and the Dhamma becomes clearer, then we experience more of the third noble truth, nirodha, cessation. We've all suffered, but as you practice more and look after the mind better, mindfulness is improved, the wisdom is clearer, well then we experience the cessation of suffering more often. And that becomes what conditions the mind. Still the sense of self may be arising, very subtle conceit, even around insight into the Four Noble Truths. I know the Four Noble Truths, or I have insight. The sense of I, self, can arise all through the practice, but it gets more subtle. As it becomes more subtle, well then there's less suffering for the mind to wade through or experience. As someone was saying, practice is, you maybe only can make it very small steps, small progress, because it seems very difficult. We have lots of craving, attachment affecting us, it's hard work. Just meditating, it's hard to keep up a regular meditation practice. It's hard to establish mindfulness, hard to develop insight. True, but you can keep going, and little by little you start to improve if you keep at it, you don't give up. That's probably the important thing, is steady, continuous practice. However difficult it is, however peaceful you feel, or you feel really not peaceful, it doesn't matter, you just keep going. They were comparing it, they were saying this story about, it's just a kind of fable, I think, the donkey that fell into the pond and started to drown. And it's just sort of keeping its head above water, so at first it wasn't panicking because it could still breathe. But then some people came along and saw, the donkey's in the pond, it's going to drown, it won't be able to get out of there unless we help it. So they started scooping the water out. They only had a little scoop, a little bucket or a little scoop. There's a lot of water, so they keep going, a little bit at a time. And suddenly the donkey realizes it's playing. Oh, I'm stuck. They're trying to get the water out because I'm going to drown. This is desperate. So the donkey becomes desperate, but he starts really shaking, using his body to shake the water out. The way big animals, they shake and water goes in all directions. So you don't get out much water by just sort of being in the water and then shaking, but it's better than anything, better than nothing. So the donkey is shaking, gradually shaking, drops and drops of water out of the pond. The people who came along with their little cups or small buckets are just scooping what they can, but because everyone kept going, gradually the level of the water went down. Eventually the donkey could climb out step by step until it could get back onto the dry land. They said, this person was saying their practice feels like that. Well, it probably does, doesn't it? One step at a time, one shake at a time, one scoop at a time. Almost seems like a hopeless task, but if you keep going, eventually you'll succeed. That's the message of the Buddha. If you keep practicing, eventually this mind will change. Because it's a conditioning process, just as we condition ourselves into suffering. We follow the causes and conditions that lead to suffering, we attach to them and keep suffering over and over again. But similarly, we can condition our way out of suffering by cultivating the path, the mindfulness, the wisdom. We can see through the sense of self as a delusion, stop craving, stop attaching, and the mind will become still, peaceful. Nothing better than a peaceful mind. No happiness more satisfying than the peaceful mind. Not just peaceful through samadhi, but peaceful through insight. Understanding, craving is to be abandoned. Then experiencing cessation of craving more and more. So maybe I'll leave you with these reflections tonight.